everyone. If we haven't met yet, my name's Erika. I'm our Graham student ministry pastor, and I'm one of our teaching pastors here on staff. And I am so glad that you are here with us today. We are wrapping up our series in Titus this week together. We have done 3 weeks prior in this series, and so if you are wanting to jump into a lot of context and history and things like that, I really encourage you to go back, listen to those 3, and then maybe catch up on this. You can find those on YouTube or the RVCC podcast. Both are great resources, whatever is more your style. But we're going to jump into some stuff and maybe not cover as much background as I normally would, but I did want to make sure that you knew where to find it. A few years ago, more than a few years ago, I was in college, and my sister called me one day, and she was in high school, and I don't know if you've noticed, but high school will try and kick the joy out of you just every day. And so she calls me, and she's telling me about something in her life, something that's complicated or difficult. She's having to put a lot of effort into this season. And I said to her, I mustered all of my Bible college knowledge, all the wisdom I had gained. And I said, an easy life does not mean a good life. And I was so proud of myself. I strutted my stuff. I was like, I am crushing it. I'm pretty sure I told my friends. I might have even figured out how to tell some of my professors, you won't believe this great advice I just gave my sister. I'm her cool older sister. I'm away at college. I'm learning all this stuff. She is so fortunate to have me as her sister. Humility is a trait I've been working on. And so I call her maybe 6 months, a year later. Not that we went 6 months or a year without talking, but in this particular conversation, it was about 6 months to a year after that. And I was talking about something that was requiring a lot of effort and energy because college will also try and kick the joy out of you. And she goes, Erika, a wise woman once told me a good life is not necessarily an easy life. The audacity that this woman had to throw my words back in my face, couldn't handle it. It was still good advice. I stood by it then, I stand by it now. But she had the audacity to just throw my words right back at me. I was so frustrated. But little did I know how much those words would prove to be evident. I think in America, we have put a real emphasis. We want things to be neat and tidy and clean, and then we have a fear of anything that is messy or complicated or maybe harder work than we anticipated it being, and so actually we avoid it. And yes, we've put that on projects, right? We want to avoid house projects or arts and craft projects. How many of you don't keep glitter in your homes? All those different kinds of things. But I think, unfortunately, we have also put that on our relationships with friends, significant others, people we go to church with, our family members. We have said that it is good for things to be clean and neat and tidy, and we have said it is bad for things to be messy or complicated or require more work, and therefore, the minute something gets a little bit uncomfortable, we're out. We're done. And I think that's created more problems for us than maybe we ever thought that it would. Now, I want to be really, really clear here. We are, in all of the conversations that I'm going to have today on this topic, I am not talking about abusive relationships. If you are in a relationship that is fundamentally unsafe, you need to go. Get help, get support, find a place that is safe for healing, grow, heal. Anything can happen in the future, but right now you need to be in a safe and secure place. Today, all of the relationships we are talking about, they're safe, but they're complicated. They require more effort than maybe we anticipated. So what do we do? What do we do as Christians who are trying to follow God, live like Jesus, follow the nudges of the Holy Spirit, but keep running into complicated people? Here is the bottom line. A truly good life allows for boundaries and grace. We're going to be in Titus chapter 3, verses 9 through 15 together today. So if you have a Bible with you, you can flip there. If not, I highly recommend downloading the YouVersion app. It is a great tool for Bible reading, for learning more, it'll read the Bible aloud to you. It is such a great tool. So you can download that and read along there as well. Like I said, we're not going to get into a ton of the context, but here's the basics that you need to know. Titus is a letter written by Paul to Titus, who is in Crete helping the early churches. And this is what he says. But avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time. After that, have nothing to do with them. You may be sure that such people are warped and sinful. They are self-condemned. There is a lot for us to process from those verses together. Good news, that's exactly what we're going to do. But it feels like there's kind of two levels that we've got to work through. First, we've got to work through some surface level stuff, and then we'll work through some stuff that's like a little bit deeper to the heart of the matter. Surface level thing number one. As I read this, I thought, what was happening in the early church that they had time to argue about who was in what families? That's what I thought when I read the word genealogies, right? Because that's what we know that word to mean. That word actually means fables. People would bring these stories, these things that weren't true, these lies, these myths, and try and pass them off as truth. It was becoming a very big problem in this community, such a big problem that Paul had to address it with them. They also say quarrels about the law. And again, our brain here today in 2022 hears quarrels about the law and thinks, oh my gosh, everyone's arguing about how the government is running things. That's actually not the case at all. The quarrels about the law is what we have come to find in what we know as the Old Testament. It was all of these laws that shaped how people lived in ways to bring God glory and honor. But then Jesus showed up on the scene and it shifted and changed everything. And so they were like, what do we do now? Like, how do we live now? So they're having these quarrels about what is important from this old way of living into this new way of living. How do we carry ourselves? What do we do? That's like a really, really valid thing to sort out. Sometimes I think that like if I had lived on the earth while Jesus lived on the earth, or if I had been able to like know Jesus or been part of the early church, I'd be like, oh my gosh, there weren't all of these other things to deal with. No, it was just as complicated to be a Christian then as it is now. So just be restful, rest assured in that. So these early churches are arguing over things, and it's causing division and angst and pain. And let's get to the heart of the matter on this. What is made really clear here is that these people were not coming with genuine hearts, asking and wanting to know more and gain more knowledge. These people were coming from a divisive place. Here at Rainier View, if you have questions, we want to hear them. You asking a question, wanting to know more, coming from a genuine place of curiosity is welcomed here. How can we, as a staff, how can your community group leader, how can a friend help you walk through some of these questions? But what was happening here in Crete was not the case at all. Verse 9 says, avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. These arguments are unprofitable and useless because of what is said in verse 10. Warn a divisive person once. It is made really clear to Titus that in his community, there are people that are coming with ill intentions in their heart. Their goal is not to learn more. Their goal is not to be a helpful asset. They are coming to cause problems. Their heart is not in a good place. Something that always throws up a little bit of a caution flag for me when I'm talking with people is when someone looks at me and says, okay, but just to play devil's advocate here, this is who you want to advocate for? Like in this moment, you're going to choose to advocate for the devil? That's problematic in and of itself, but that's not always the thing. Typically, they follow that up with something that they believe or an opinion that they have that is actually toxic or problematic, but they're not quite ready to let go of it, or they're not quite sure what to think of it, but they want to try and pass it off in like a cutesy disguised kind of way. Kind of like when a person comes up to you and says, hey, no offense, but your hair looks ugly today. It's like, no, there's still offense, but you tried to make it not offensive, but the offense is still there, but like we can't actually have a discussion about it now. if you are wrestling through something that you're like, ooh, maybe this way of thinking isn't actually good anymore, can I recommend approaching someone with humility, saying, hey, here's this thing that I used to believe and I'm working through trying to figure out how to undo this in my life. How do I live now in light of this? If you came to me with that attitude, I'd be like, let's talk all day. But if you come to me saying like, can I play devil's advocate? I'm going to be far less inclined to have a conversation with you about what you follow up and say. And Paul tells Titus how to intentionally deal with intentionally divisive hearts. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn a second time. After that, have nothing to do with them. This is coming across as like a real 3 strikes you're out kind of policy in this church. But this problem was pervasive enough that they had to address it. They could not focus on the things that were the most important because they had to keep dealing with this other thing that was taking their time and their energy. This is a clear example for us of grace and boundaries. A person comes with a divisive heart. They're not coming from a good place, but they come to church leadership and they approach it from a terrible place. And church leadership says, hey, you know what? Here, this is the warning. Here, that's really not cool. That's not okay. We want you to still be part of this community, but the way you're carrying yourself right now, that's not going to fly. That's grace. That's grace and boundaries. That's saying, hey, we want you to still be here. We're not kicking you out, but something has to shift. Something has to change here. Then the person comes a second time, displaying no change in heart or motive or behavior. And leadership says again, okay, you've done this once already. You're coming back now a second time with the same attitude, carrying yourself in the same way. This actually is not going to work for us. If you come again, we're going to ask you to leave. And then if they come a third time with the same heart, no change in heart, no change in behavior, well, it's been made really clear, hey, we want to work with you, we want to help you grow through this, but the way you're carrying yourself is not okay, and actually here will be the ultimate consequence if you can't get on board. Again, this isn't a person coming asking genuine questions. This isn't a person coming trying to figure something out. This is a person who is coming, who is trying, consciously trying to ruin what was happening there. I recently read the book, The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi, and she says that anytime you're making decisions, you have to figure out what is the most important. And then everything else goes around that. And she uses it in some smaller stakes sort of way, like what matters the most in your living room, but also what matters the most in the life you're trying to build and the families that you're trying to create and the friendships that you want to have, what matters the most. And then everything else goes to support that thing that matters the most. And here at Rainier View, we've actually talked about the things that matter the most here over the last 3 weeks. Pursue God, engage in community, make a difference, be a person of influence and be aware of who's influencing you. That's what matters the most here. And so the stuff that detracts from that, we can't spend time investing in that. In fact, Paul actually addresses that in his next set of verses. Verse 12. As soon as I send Artemis or Tychicus to you, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, because I have decided to winter there. Do everything you can to help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way, and see that they have everything they need. Our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. Everyone with me sends you greetings. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all. Let's read verse 14 one more time because it was so good and gets to the heart of what we're getting at today. Our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. When we have to devote time to things that do not fall in line with pursue God, engage in community, or make a difference, that is unproductive. We want to be devoted to doing what is good. We have established what is most important. But a lot of this conversation is around church leadership. And the majority of you watching are like, Erika, I'm not on staff at Rainier View. And I'm like, I'm aware. I'm very aware. So what does this mean for us when we are not actively building the church? What does it mean for us in our relationships with parents or siblings, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, friendships, aunts, uncles? What does it mean in all of those other places? I'm so glad that you asked. Let's get into that. Here's the deal. If you are wanting to honor God with your life, you are going to have to be in relationship with other humans. And I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes humans can be bummers. Have you noticed? I've noticed. And sometimes a person's default is like, well, I'm just not going to deal with people then. But that's not an option, because we're to pursue God, engage in community, and make a difference. And all of those things actually are done far better. Like engaging in community, you have to have other people. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you. So how do we as Christians live? Well, what matters the most is us becoming people who look like Jesus. And so that then shapes everything else that we do. I would really love for my life to be clean and easy, but that is stagnant. There's no growth there. What I actually genuinely want is to grow with Jesus, to navigate through messy or complicated moments. I want to be someone who lives the good life, who allows for boundaries and grace. I want to be someone like Jesus, who invited his betrayer to his last meal, who kept hanging out with dudes, who kept trying to grab power and kept missing all of what he was getting at. I want to be like Jesus, who said, God, I want to do your will. But hey, like if there's a way I could not go to the cross, that would be great, but I will do it anyways because I want to do what is in your will. To live that way, we have to rely on God. We cannot just be people who just say like, well, this is my own knowledge. This is just what I'm going to do. We have to shape and build our lives around God and what he would have for us. I think when we culturally linked good and easy, we began to miss out on the good and hard work that comes from following Jesus, that reshapes how we live and how we carry ourselves. There's peace that accompanies that, right? You shouldn't be a tortured soul all of the time. But there should be some hard work that is going on inside of you. You're probably at this point in time tired of me like posing questions and hypotheticals to you. And you're like, I need something a little bit more concrete. Okay, so let's say you are interacting with someone who maybe rubs you the wrong way. They get under your skin. You can't quite figure it out, but every time you leave them, you feel a little bit uneasy. What are you going to do? Here's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to ask God to reveal to you what's going on. Say, God, I'm not sure what this is, but I feel uneasy with this person. What's happening? Because once you know what it is, you can name it, and then those things can be addressed. Here's the second thing you're going to do. Once you know what it is, ask God for wisdom. It is biblical. God wants to give us wisdom. He is eager to give it, so ask for it. But then here's the third thing, and this feels like the much harder step. Once God gives you wisdom, you actually have to do something with that. Maybe he's going to say, hey, have a little bit more grace here. And you're like, but I don't want to. Or maybe he's going to say, put a little bit more boundary here. And you're going to be like, but I don't want to. Actually follow the wisdom that God has for you. In this particular moment in our world, disagreement we have made equivalent with being cut out of someone's life. We aren't sure if we can sit around the table with someone who votes differently, who worships differently, who views the world differently, or all of the other different things about us. We just don't know how to navigate that well. In fact, we as a culture are eagerly waiting who is going to be the next person that we have built up on a pedestal to crash and fall. And maybe we're not eagerly waiting for it, but I think a lot of us get the popcorn out to watch it all unfold. I have been guilty of that from time to time. I'm not happy about it. Again, I'm working on it. We're all growing as humans. We have to learn to look at the heart rather than the difference. Do you and your friend fundamentally disagree on something, but both of your hearts are in a good place? Then stick around, see what happens, continue to let that grow, figure out what a good boundary looks like there. Because a healthy boundary is not actually the same as canceling someone. A healthy boundary is saying, I want you to still be in my life, but the way we were doing things before, it just actually isn't going to work anymore. So we have to make a change. We have to do something different. That's a gift. I sometimes feel really uncomfortable when people put boundaries on me because my first thought is like, oh, they must hate me now. But that's not actually the case at all. They still want me around, but something that I did just isn't working for them anymore. And that's okay. And we'll figure it out and we'll learn and we'll grow. But if you keep assuming that like when you met your best friend, that person was going to stay exactly the same for the rest of their lives, you have not allowed much room for growth or change in a person. So what are some other ways that this can play out? If you and your friend disagree on something, again, your hearts are in a good place, we've established that, but you fundamentally disagree on something, maybe you say, hey, I would love to talk to you about everything else, but I don't think that we can talk about this together. Okay, that's fine, because you don't want to ruin your friendship over that. Or maybe you want to talk about something with a friend, but you're like, I can't have this dominate our conversation, so you say, can we set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes? And then as soon as that timer goes off, poof, you move on to the next topic. I have to do stuff like this with people all of the time because what they really want to get into, maybe I don't feel like getting into in that moment. In fact, in 2015, I came on staff here as an intern, and I was a full-time intern and I was a full-time student. So I would spend all day doing church stuff, and then I would go home and I would read books and I would write these papers analyzing what I was learning here and what was happening here. And it was just like church in my brain all the time. And then on Sundays, I would get up Sunday morning and I would do church Sunday morning. And then I would do church on Sunday night as well with our students. And I would get to my family in the middle of the day on Sunday and they would be like, let's talk all about church this morning. Because I was attending I was working at our Graham campus. They were attending our Parkland campus. And I finally had to be like, I cannot. I am not approaching this level-headed. I'm not approaching this from a good place. Can we talk about church on Tuesdays? Like, I still really want to talk to you about this, but right now is not the best time. And they were like, yeah. Of course. Setting boundaries isn't inherently unloving. Having a heart in a bad place is inherently unloving. The people around us will say and do terrible things from time to time. We have to learn how to set boundaries and grace. So here is your challenge today. What is that one relationship that is not sitting in a good spot in your life? Either because you have not given it enough grace or you have not given it enough boundaries. And some of you, you're like, gut instinct, I know exactly what I have to do. Some of you need to take a little bit more time. Do not let today end without figuring out who that person is. And then begin to do those things. Ask God to reveal what you need to do. Or ask God to reveal what's going on. Ask God for wisdom. And then begin to do those things. But you might need to put a boundary in place that might feel a little bit uncomfortable, or you might need to put some grace in place that also might make you a little bit uncomfortable. Following Jesus is what matters the most. And loving Jesus like other people did is sometimes messy. But the truly good life allows for grace and boundaries. And that's what matters the most.